Welcome, movie fans. Thanks for joining us for this special Star Wars Podcast Day episode of Reading Between the Reels. If you're a new listener, we're so glad you found us. If you've been enjoying the show, please like, follow, and subscribe, and review us on iTunes or Spotify. You can also support the show by posting on your socials and by joining our Facebook group. Today on the show, to help commemorate the anniversary of Jedi Talk, the very first Star Wars podcast, we're giving you a taste of what we do on our show by going back into the archives for one of our early deconstructions. In this episode, we revisit the earlier incarnation of our show, Coruscant Community College, to break down Solo, a Star Wars story.
Today on the show, we'll continue our series of in-depth examinations of the Star Wars films with a deconstruction of Solo, a Star Wars story.
So as we did with The Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith, we're going to be sharing our general thoughts on this film and its place in the larger Star Wars canon. And we're going to break down the movie by focusing on the aspects we covered in Season 1. So one thing I wanted to mention just off the top, just to kind of set context, that we are watching the films in chronological order. This is a different order that we teach them in. So this was kind of interesting to do this film as if I would teach it. I've never taught it. So I'm definitely looking at this with new eyes. But I did want to mention that this film, at least at the beginning, is set 6 years after Revenge of the Sith. And then the bulk of it is 9 years after, just so we kind of have a frame of reference for where we're at. So I guess that makes Luke 6, and then Luke and Leia 6, and then Luke and Leia 9 through the bulk of this, if you can kind of imagine that happening.
Do we ever get an age for Han in the movie?
I hear, not in the movie.
Right.
I think there's some supplemental material we get that he's 20 and then 23. I think
early 20s.
Yeah, I think is what we're going with.
Okay.
Roughly Harrison Ford's age in A New Hope, minus 10.
Yeah.
But I think he's skews a little bit younger than that. So let's go ahead and jump into cinematography. Another thing to mention, too, is that this is the first film we've done that Lucas is not involved in. And so I went back, I had to figure out, I knew Ron Howard directed it, and we'll talk a little bit about him. And this film has a really good pedigree, though. Like, Ron Howard is he's an Oscar-winning director for A Beautiful Mind. And then, we get to cinematography. We have Bradford Young, who's the cinematographer, who was an Oscar nominee for Arrival. So he knows what he's doing. What were some things that you noticed from cinematography, Matt?
Well, first off, and this isn't really tied to cinematography specifically, but the first thing that really popped out to me was the editing of the film. In particular, my favorite cut, and I'm sure it's your favorite cut too, is when Han is trying to leave Corellia the first time. And he turns to the Imperial officer. He goes, "I'm going to be a pilot." And the Imperial officer says, "We'll have you flying in no time." Smash cut, flying through the air on Mimbam, I believe. And it's the mud and the war. And it's such a fantastic cut. But there's a couple moments. Just the editing in general feels a little tighter and feels a little bit more energetic and purposeful. Because I think a lot of the prequel movies that we just watched, the editing was in a style that was trying to be functional. Like it was very about like creating clarity in what was happening. So it wasn't like super experimental. I didn't see a ton of editing choices that felt like, oh, they're really trying to show some meaning with it or create some tension or to have humor in the editing in particular. Whereas I felt like in Solo, that felt way more present.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the editing was one thing that jumped out to me. I was rewatching the film this last week and just, wow, it is so quick. It's so dynamic. It's so different than what we've watched for the last 3 films. It's like, it's kind of perfect to just drop this in here and see for contrast. And then I had to, who did the editing? I had to know. And so I looked it up, and it's this gentleman named Pietro Scalia, who's won multiple Oscars. And so, again, going to the pedigree, I mean, these guys, they put this crack team together to put this, this film should really be, in my opinion, should be looked at as a better film than a lot of people give it credit for.
That's a really interesting point because everyone I talk to loves this movie.
Right.
I honestly have not heard a single person who doesn't like this film. I think a lot of it got caught up in the very chaotic wake of The Last Jedi. Mm-hmm. And if I'm remembering correctly, it was only released 6 months after that. And so,
yeah, if that.
Yeah. And so I think with all of the controversy around The Last Jedi, and then so recent, like there's a little bit of maybe Star Wars fatigue for film goers, because this is a fantastic movie and I've never heard anyone disparage it. So I think it's like a sleeper hit that's not a sleeper. I think people like it.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of like kind of nuts and bolts things that I looked at. I mean, I don't want to touch on some of them. And the first thing is, I mean, I noticed some interesting things with circles again in this film, which is cool. You get that really early one when Lady Proxima comes out of the water, that they're circled up that way. And then there's circles around the sabacc table. But what I think is really interesting is that, and I've seen this in documentaries, I think probably some of the stuff that's on the disc, is that Bradford Young uses a lot of natural lighting sources. Like the lights that you see in the scene is what's actually giving the light. And so this film is a lot darker.
It is.
There's a lot more shadow in this one.
Yeah.
It's very soft indoors. And so it looks very different than what we've seen so far from Star Wars. It's very unique, kind of impressionistic in this film. The use of color in this is as well, especially at the beginning. It was very striking to me that it's very blue when you get back to Proxima's camp. And, you know, we talked about in our cinematography episode that blue can represent sadness and kind of depression. And you get, you know, the scrum rats are very, I mean, that'd be how they'd feel, you know, they're under that oppression. But you see, like at one point, Han moves Kira into the light and it's kind of gold, which can represent excitement or possibility, optimism. It's, you know, it's very intentional when you're doing that. It also had that at the beginning when he's trying to jumpstart the speeder, that there's flashes of gold with that too. So it's very artistic, for lack of a better word. But there's a lot of interesting, a lot of extreme close-ups in this film too. Speaking of camera work, again, back to that stealing speeder scene, it zooms in just like on his hands. You don't actually see what's going on right away. And I always think about when it zooms right in on Han's eye, right when he's about to go to light speed right out of the maw. I mean, it zooms in super close, which is cool. And then also, you know, shots from the trailer, like Han's holster, when Enfys Nest shows up at the end, you kind of see her out of focus.
Yeah, that was one I had written down too.
And one I hadn't noticed before was that right after he shoots Beckett, the camera, and I just happened to pause it at that point, and I look back and it's extreme wide shot where you can just see Han barely make out that there's a character and Chewie. And it's like, man, he is alone now because Kira's about to leave and his mentor's gone, at his own hand. But, you can see that. And it's like one of the only shots like that in the entire film. But for the most part, I just thought, man, the camera work's really dynamic. It's very modern versus, the prequels, which is kind of more of a classic style.
Yeah, it's a lot more static, except for maybe moments in Revenge of the Sith. But overall, the prequels tend to be much more static. And this feels just like a modern action movie as far as the camera work is concerned.
Yeah, and I should mention, of course, the great scene with the convex too. I mean, that's just it's a fascinating scene where the airplane, the train moves upside down.
Yeah.
Again, more close-ups, like when the range trooper puts his foot down. You really are sucked into the action, and you can feel the danger. You can almost feel the wind in the way that it's shot so dynamically. So just a great job with cinematography.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think that's a good transition into the sound, because the music from Solo, I'm going to commit a little bit of Star Wars heresy, because if I look at the soundtrack for a whole movie, I honestly think that the soundtrack for Solo might be my favorite soundtrack out of all the Star Wars films. John Powell.
Yep.
And of course, John Williams created the opening theme for Han.
Right.
But John Powell just knocks it out of the park. And I think the only other composer to work on a Star Wars film is Michael Giacchino. But I really, really sincerely hope that John Powell comes back, because the Enfys Nest theme is up there for me as an iconic Star Wars track. And it reminds me of Duel of the Fates with the chanting. And I don't know, it just struck me as so interesting. The first time I remember sitting in the theater watching it, and it struck me as just a powerful, aggressive theme, which is an interesting choice for Enfys Nest after we find out that they're actually kind of the proto-rebellion.
Right.
And they're not really the bad guys. But the Mind Mission is a great moment of the soundtrack. Han and Kira's theme is fantastic as well.
Agreed.
And I think Han gets his first actual true theme. If I'm remembering correct, that Han never had a true theme song from any of the movies until this one.
Yeah, I had a lot written down for that as well. And I agree that I hope John Powell comes back. I mean, I've seen some of his stuff, and even like How to Train Your Dragon is great. I mean, it's a kid's movie, but the music is amazing.
The score is amazing. Yes.
Yeah. So from research, I realized or saw that John Williams did, the Han's theme, which you hear at the beginning. You hear that several times kind of when it's like Han springs into action. And so that's kind of like John Williams' biggest contribution to this. But Powell he has his own themes. The Enfys Nest theme, again, that's amazing. The Han and Kira theme is beautiful. I really like Chewbacca's theme, which Chewbacca never had a theme either. You hear that the first time when they come onto the snow planet Vandor 1. And it's kind of regal, but also tribal in a way. It's a really interesting song. But I also love that John Powell uses leitmotif throughout this thing. I mean, his own stuff, but you also get tons and tons of nods to Williams' work as well. And so I was kind of just keeping track of those as almost turn off the visual and just, or close my eyes and just listen for things I heard. And, I think most people look at where Han sees the Millennium Falcon for the first time and they hear, the main title of Star Wars. And you get that a couple of other key times, like the first time that Han flies the Millennium Falcon, when Chewie sits down a little bit later on. And it's kind of like, we're putting the pieces together for A New Hope. That's kind of the way I'm reading that. Did you have any other leitmotifs that you noticed from the original trilogy?
Yeah. So the one that always stands out to me is, I believe it's the TIE fighter attack when they are flying into or near the Maw and the TIE fighters are after them. I'm blanking on the name, the true name of the track, but it's from A New Hope when the TIE fighters are attacking.
Yeah, I had that one too. It's the Here They Come.
Yeah.
And I had to look these up. I don't have these off the top of my head. I mean, I'm reading off my notes right now. Yeah, that whole sequence getting out of, I'm blanking on the name
Kessel
right
Run.
now. Kessel Run. Thank you. You get the Death Star theme when the Star Destroyer shows up, and then you get Here They Come.
Yeah.
And then you get the asteroid theme from Empire as the chase continues, where they're coming after him and he's dodging all the debris. And so those are great. And of course, we talked about this in a previous episode that the Imperial March shows up as source music,
Right.
Which is cool. And then that's the one thing I had for vocal sounds too, is that there's kind of a narration or a voiceover where it's the recruitment pitch.
I actually think that this is one of the strengths of Solo is, at least for parts of it, the way they tie the Solo of this movie to the Solo of the future that we see in the original trilogy. And I like that they do that through the motifs. Like we get the echoes of Empire Strikes Back in this movie, where Han's, of course he has confidence flying through the asteroids in Empire Strikes Back.
Right.
I mean, he made the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs, rounding down, of course. And, I think that L3 being the quote unquote brain of the Falcon is another great piece, because really the Falcon is just this freighter. I mean, to me, the way I read it is it's kind of like a semi-truck of the Star Wars galaxy.
Yep.
It's for shipping things. And so, but somehow it survives and it's this amazing ship. And I think the fact that L3 is tied to it is a really interesting way of kind of in canon giving the ship superpowers, as it were,
right,
and giving it sentience, but just like a little something special, because it is a special ship.
Absolutely. So I had one more little bit before we get to performance, and I'm sure we'll talk more about L3 when we get down there, because I had some stuff about that too. But I did notice, and I had never heard it this time I've seen this film, I don't know, a dozen times, is that the original Imperial leitmotif that's only used in A New Hope and then briefly it's used in Rogue One showed up in this one too. As soon as the range trooper showed up, as soon as that you see that foot come down, and it's one quote of it. That's it. Just one little bit. I'm like, oh my! I had to go back and rewind. Yep, there it is. So Powell is just masterfully weaving in classic themes, like you said, tying this and Han to the original trilogy in that version of things. So yeah, let's talk about performance. What did you think about performances? What did you notice?
Overall, I thought the acting was fantastic, really across the board. I love Woody Harrelson. Paul Bettany's always been a fantastic actor. Amelia Clarke, I've been a big fan of hers from Game of Thrones, and she's done some other projects, but she's a fantastic actress. And I think for me, the two big unknowns were Donald Glover and Alden Ehrenreich. I'm going to call him Alden.
Yeah, Alden. Yeah, there you go.
And especially Alden because Han Solo is such an iconic character. I mean, and Harrison Ford is such an iconic actor. When I first heard they were making a Solo movie, I rolled my eyes and said, that's a terrible decision, and they will live to regret it. How can you have someone play Han Solo? I could see Lando because we really don't get that much of him, but I just didn't feel like they could really separate Han Solo from Harrison Ford. And Alden does it. He pulls it off. Really, I was blown away. I think he plays a young Han Solo fantastic. And I've heard people say this before too, and I completely agree with it, that he's not really doing an impression. He is just playing the same character traits as Han Solo. He's brash, he's arrogant, but deep down, he's not a bad person. He doesn't want to hurt people. He breaks the law. He's an outlaw, a vigilante in some sense, but it's not to hurt other people. It's to survive. His goal to me feels like survival without hurting people, which is, I think is a very interesting contrast to Kira and Amelia Clarke, who is a survivor, as Paul Bettany says towards the end of the film. But I think hers is a more desperate survival where she will stab you in the back if that's what it takes to live. And I don't see Han doing that.
Yeah, it's good. I agree with just about everything that you said. I figured we'd probably be on the same page with this. I've never watched Game of Thrones, but I know you're a big fan of that, so I was gonna make sure that got brought up, and I'm glad that you did. On the other hand, though, I was a big fan of Donald Glover since Community. That was I loved that show, and so I was excited to see that he was cast as Lando, and I think he's just incredibly charismatic and just a lot of fun when he's on screen. But I also agree with the whole entire cast is great. Ehrenreich is also, although there's only a couple of other things that you can kind of see him in. One of which was Hail Caesar.
Yeah.
He's good in that too. So that's another thing that you can kind of check out for that. But, and yeah, Paul Bettany's awesome no matter what he's playing. So much. Oh, another thing I want to mention we haven't talked about it yet. I'm going to try and say his name right. Jonas Suotomo.
Yeah.
Playing Chewbacca. I mean, this guy took over from a legend, with Peter Mayhew, and he completely embodies Chewbacca. Like I know intellectually that it's not the same guy underneath the suit, but it feels like Chewie. And he does such a great job with the body language, and as much as possible to get facial expressions out of that thing. He communicates so well with that. And he and Ehrenreich together, they have, I think, just amazing chemistry. Some of the things that I picked out dialogue were absolutely the two of them together. And when when Han is asking to be staked, he's, I'm serious, stake me. Don't. And then Chewie says something, don't listen to him. It's very much that same dynamic that we get in Force Awakens. Yes, I do every time. It's that it feels like the same characters.
It does
in a lot of ways, and so great casting, and the two of them are just very much on point. I think
that's what makes this film. Is I actually quite like the writing of the general plot of the story. I think it feels like just a very fun adventure film, but I don't think it works if the actors don't have that chemistry where it feels like the same characters that we grow to know and love in the original trilogy, and it really does. You said you wanted to talk a little bit about L3. What were your thoughts about her?
So I love that she becomes part of the Falcon, and it just makes that line, that 3PO says in Empire about and I'm not sure where your ship learned to communicate, but has the most peculiar dialect, where, I see that now and I cannot not think that he's talking about L3. L3 is talking smack to him in the way that she does, and, she's being condescending, and it just kind of changes that scene. And I love the fact that, you get new Star Wars and it colors the rest of Star Wars. And so every time you watch it, it's like you're watching it for the first time in a certain way.
Yeah.
Because you got this new information. And, seeing The Han and Lando dynamic in this film does that too for Empire. So some of my favorite lines from this movie are, and you mentioned it, it reminds you of, like, that's the character we're going to see. So when Lando says things like, everything you heard about me is true. I mean, that's Billy D. Williams just dripping with charm and arrogance. And I've really come to enjoy the line, I don't like it, I don't agree with it, but I accept it. But what a great line, and not a bad philosophy for life, honestly. And you already mentioned not if you round down, buddy. That just makes you laugh too. And 190 years old, you look great. All of these things that are, again, Han and Chewie moments. So did you have anything else on performance before we move on?
There was honestly nothing that really stood out to me. I mean, everyone was kind of on point. There's nothing really for me to point out other than, the couple moments that I really love. When we were first introduced to Drayden Voss and we see him dealing with the regional governor, like that's the perfect introduction. I love Paul Bettany's self-assuredness, and it's like he's smiling, but he's not smiling on the inside.
Right.
Like he'll kill you in a second, but he's being very polite. I think he just plays that off really well. There's just a ton of little moments that I love throughout the film. Not to take too much time to name them all, but it's really fantastically acted.
Yeah, and that's another good, going back to the editing too, that comes right after you hear that he's, talking to, or he's dealing with the regional governor, and then you see how he's dealing with him. So I just had a couple things, just the fact that I thought it was cool that Han's costume's kind of inverted at the beginning, where he's got a white vest over a black shirt. Lando's wardrobe is amazing. And it's great that they played up on that with, all those capes. I just thought that was just a lot of just little nods to things that have either been in directly in the films or just kind of in pop culture in general. I do like a lot what they did with Kira in the time gap, that she does feel significantly older, and that's just, essentially hairstyle and costuming. That she feels like a different character, or at least a different version of the character, that she truly has evolved. So I just thought it was, it's excellent work all around.
So how about setting and design? What were your thoughts on those?
The thing that stands out to me the most, and I love Corellia, and that was good just to see Corellia, and then it's not a good place to come from. Heavy industrial, lots of smog, lots of grays, even in the daytime. I love Mimban. I just thought it was great that they included Mimban, and that it's completely shrouded in fog, which is, of course, a nod to Splinter of the Mind's Eye and the fact that, had that been filmed as the original Star Wars sequel, that you wouldn't really see anything, and so you could do it on the cheap. And they totally just leaned into that. Like, you don't get to see anything. That could totally, and it probably is, like, just on a soundstage. But you get a wide variety of locations in this. You get yet another snow planet, which is kind of fun. You get Kessel finally, get Savarine, another desert planet. And then I had to look this one up. Numidian Prime is the jungle planet at the end, which the more I see when they do lots and lots of planets like this, the more I appreciate Rogue One for like telling us, because I'm just kind of a nut for that stuff. I want to know what it's called. But I think just a great mix of environments and colors.
I think for me, there's a couple, the two locations, I guess I'll say, that really stand out to me. Like you said, Mimban, fantastic. But I also just love what they're doing with it, because I feel like it's one of the few times where we really see the Empire be the Empire in a smaller way. Like, yeah, they blow up Alderaan, but like this is a small little piece where it feels more intimate in a way, and feels like it's tapping into that kind of politically critical elements that George Lucas had in Star Wars. There's that moment when I think Han says something like, we're the outsiders here. Like, where are we going?
Right.
And it's that kind of critical thinking that gets him in trouble in the Imperial Army. And I just love seeing that, because it's a nod to the fact that it's almost this kind of galactic colonialism that the Empire is dealing in. And there is an evilness to that. It's not just blowing up planets, but it's the little things where they're invading this planet, but the propaganda is saying that they're the heroes, they're liberating it. And the people who don't buy into that, like Han, get churned out.
Yeah, I had that a little bit later on, but I had that as well. That he says, like, it's their planet. we're the hostiles, right? And that you do get to see the Empire at kind of the height of its powers and why it's so bad. And that, we don't really get to see in the original trilogy what the Empire is doing. We hear a little bit about it. And of course we see Alderaan, but things like this and Rebels does a great job, like with Tarkintown on Lothal, where we get to see kind of like the day-to-day just oppression and totalitarianism, which is great just kind of for world building sake. But other things I noticed that I really liked, I'm just going to go down to props real quick, is that the dice just keep showing up in this film, which they're kind of tying together from Last Jedi, why those dice are important. The Sabbat cards and the money, that's kind of cool. And then you get to see Dejarik. That's cool. But like for me, the coolest thing, setting design, is Dryden Voss's office and all the Easter eggs that are in there, all these things from Expanded Universe, the old Expanded Universe. But it's great to see Mandalorian armor, especially now with context from The Mandalorian. You're like, if that's Beskar, that thing is worth a lot. The Sith holocron, and then you get fun things like the idol from Raiders of the Lost Ark just shows up in there because Lawrence Kasdan wrote that and this, and so you get kind of cross-universe nods to things. That's just fun. And of course, we talked about the clean Millennium Falcon as kind of just a departure and also a good way to kind of set this film time-wise.
Going back just a little bit to you talking about the oppression that we see, we also see that in Kessel. And I think that also is great world building because I think there's some very obscure references to Kessel throughout a couple Star Wars movies. I think C-3PO mentions that they're going to be thrown, into Kessel, which means nothing to us
right
when you first hear it. And now seeing it, it's like, oh yeah, that would be really, really bad. The droid escape, I think, has got some great heart and humor. And the whole scene where they're breaking out just has a lot of just fun elements to it. And I think, overall, this movie's got a lot of strong Kasdan energy because it feels like a little bit of a Indiana Jones in Star Wars universe, where it just feels like a fun adventure that's just enjoyable to sit back and watch.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. It just feels fun, and after kind of the heaviness of and that's, we just did the heavy films, and then coming out of Last Jedi, which is a heavy film, this is such a departure. And it really, I was going to ask later, but now's as good a time as any. Do you think that this film works as a one-off with no context? If this was the first Star Wars film that you saw, essentially is what I'm asking, do you think that would work for you?
Short answer is yes. Long answer is that the weakest parts of the film for me are some of the fan service elements that don't mean anything unless you have the context of everything else. For me, like when Han gets his name Solo, it kind of, I don't really care that much. I just thought his name was Solo. I didn't need like a random explanation for it. And those are very small and forgivable in this movie, so it doesn't bother me. But I do think if you're watching it, it might be kind of like, well, that was a little weird. Like, why doesn't he have a last name?
Right.
And so for us, obviously in context, we know it's just a little bit of fan service. I think it's probably the easiest film to watch, like by itself, solo. It's probably the most self-contained narrative-wise. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. I know that they've, at one point there was plans, and maybe we'll still get some sequel, whether it be a Disney Plus series or a feature film. But I kind of hope that they don't. I'm okay with there just being a 10-year gap, and that somewhere in there, Alden Ehrenreich turns into Harrison Ford, and that we can kind of put the pieces together without being told piece by piece this is how it goes. Which I agree. I think that's kind of the weaker parts of the film is when they're like, okay, well, this is how he got his name. Here's how he gets his gun. Like, I really didn't need that. I'm like, yes, we wanted to see him get the Millennium Falcon, and that was a great payoff. Like, I want to see him get that from Lando. It's good to see him meet up with Chewie, and that's kind of what I had with Hero's Journey. Just to kind of jump ahead just real fast, for that, it kind of just brings, it's kind of the origin of Han Solo on his way to becoming who he's going to be in A New Hope. But we don't have to get everything.
Yeah,
we can leave that stuff. I mean, there's a big enough time gap where, like, I'm hoping the character is going to evolve over the next decade. You don't have to like make him Harrison Ford and then he's going to be sitting around for 10 years, not changing. So
Have you ever read any of the Dr. Aphra comics?
not yet. I have not.
Because it reminds me a lot of her series is very much Indiana Jones, but Star Wars. And that's the vibe that I get from this. And I think there are at least rumors that a Dr. Aphra show was coming to Disney Plus. I don't know if that's been confirmed. I know a couple weeks back, Disney released that there's a whole slate of shows coming to Disney Plus. I don't remember if it was on there. But I sincerely hope that we get more of this. I feel like Dr. Aphra would be in a very similar vein of adventure. And I think what Solo does really well as well is that it's almost like a slice of life from the Star Wars galaxy that isn't tied directly to the main trilogy. Like I know like Han and Chewie, obviously, and of course we have Maul as well. But I feel like in a lot of ways it's very divorced from the rest of the Star Wars universe. And in a similar vein, that's kind of one of the things I like about The Mandalorian is it feels a little disconnected, except in some parts, especially season 2.
Right.
but a lot of it is kind of standalone, where you see different parts of the galaxy. And I think that's one of the greatest parts of Star Wars is Lucas created this galaxy where millions of imaginary people live, doing all sorts of things. And Solo kind of explores that a little bit. I really wish that Disney would give us a lot more of that exploration of the galaxy, not just the Skywalker saga.
Yeah. Well, that's a very nice segue into the galaxy, because we talked about characters throughout,
Yeah.
and not a whole lot else. I think we've covered everything. I like that Jon Favreau's in it again. I think that's like the one thing I had that I was sad to see him, both Rio and Val killed off, because I enjoyed those characters, even the small amount they were paid off, which speaks to the writing and the performance that, yeah, we cared about those characters, even only spending 10 minutes with them. But of course, they had to go so that there was a need for Han and Chewie to join up. But speaking of Maul, because he's the one thing with the Force that fits. He's the one Jedi or Sith character that shows up. He's the one guy with the lightsaber. What did you think about his inclusion?
Well, I'll tell you, my wife was confused.
Yeah.
Because her first thought was, isn't he dead? And well, you see, if you get cut in half and fall down the shaft in Star Wars, that's about the safest way that you can survive. Palpatine lives, Maul lives. Yeah. And of course, you watch Clone Wars, you know that he, timeline-wise, he's alive.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a fun piece for people like us who consume a lot of the Star Wars media. I feel like it might have been a little better as like more of an Easter egg, something laying around. I will say, though, that I really wish that we had a sequel, because I feel like that's a very fun area to explore. And I feel like by itself, it's fine. It's fun. But I wish we could have another movie where we could explore what Kira does in connection to Maul and how Han might, interact with those two. I think that would be a really fun story to explore.
Yeah, I've heard those same things. Isn't he dead? Or also like, so this movie's before Phantom Menace.
Yeah,
like getting confused with the timeline and the thing that I was excited about is, and that's very much, that is the epitome of fan service. It's like if you have not been paying attention to the animated material, you are missing something. And there's good and there's bad to that. I thought that was pretty incredible way of saying, yeah, it all counts. So if you're a fan of that, like this is kind of validation for you that this has happened, and we've seen, like, he lives right up into almost A New Hope. That's when Kenobi finally kills him on Tatooine. I love that it was Sam Witwer. And that was a moment where the reveal is slow. You get his voice first. And I remember watching that in the theater and be like, that's Sam Witwer. What is happening? And then it was like, oh my gosh, that's Maul. And then you get that quick little Duel the Fate snippet right when he lights his lightsaber. And it's quick. It's just as quick as that original Imperial March or Imperial theme from A New Hope. So that's just fun. But I just had, looking at culture, we talked about the Empire deep in its reign. That was my big thing coming away. Getting to see kind of more of the underworld with Crimson Dawn. I thought that was just a great reveal that, yeah, you guys are working for the bad guys, and, the Emphas Nest, those guys are the good guys. Like you said, the kind of proto-rebellion. And then just a lot of fun species stuff in this one, with the Ardinian which is great. All the Sabak players, getting to see the Pikes in live action. And I really, really like the Lady Proxima species, Grindalid, I think is how you say it. I think it's cool that she and Moloch are the same species, but he's kind of trying to pass off as like a humanoid. And she's like, no, this is who we are. So I thought that was pretty sweet. So let's see. I'm going to skip down if we have any final thoughts about this.
I think that Solo's one of my favorite of the new Star Wars films. I think it hits that area where it's a fun movie. It's kind of like a roller coaster where, it's got all the twists and turns and all the, fun moments. I enjoy going back to it over and over again. I think that it doesn't break the mold for Star Wars. It's not, I think it's very adventurous in the editing, in the camera work, but that's more of just kind of taking Star Wars into more modern movie making. And I think we see that with Rian Johnson and JJ too. But I don't think story-wise it's really that adventurous. And I'm kind of okay with that. It is what it is. And it's just like a really fun adventure. And I would love to see more films like this. I also think that, as we'll talk about later, there's room for Star Wars to grow into other things. And I think that they could take Solo and they could push it into more adventurous story spaces, really explore those crime syndicates and what kind of stories you could tell with that. And I think that's a really interesting possibility that Solo opens up.
Yeah, this sounds like this is the first one that we've reviewed that you're like, I don't have these massive issues that I'd like to change with it, which is great. Just kind of playing off of what you said, and because I had something similar to this too about the underworld, is I was struck this time when Val mentions Bosk. And of course, we only see Bosk. We see him in the Clone Wars, but the only time we see him in live action is in Empire Strikes Back when he's hunting Han. And so it kind of, for the first time, I realized, a lot of those guys that showed up on the bridge of that Star Destroyer may have worked with Han or worked with someone who worked with Han. And so it makes sense to send those guys who would know his haunts, know how to follow him, know his methods. And that just kind of struck me as, wow, that's kind of ironic that he's built all these connections and that like that might come back to bite him. The bounty hunter we ran into in Ord Mantell, all those things, those might have been people that we could see. For instance, like if there was a Solo sequel, all those relationships could be kind of solidified that way. The only thing that I don't know if I would change it, but what I really enjoyed is, have you read the novelization? I think we might have talked about this, is that there's an epilogue in the novelization where Emphas Nest takes the coaxium and meets Saw Gerrera. And Saw Gerrera has a teenage girl with him, or she's not even a teenager yet, and it's Jyn Erso. So It just bridges all of that stuff together, and that, you could argue maybe that's too much fan service, but I really enjoy the fact that, this is, like, Han is already he's helping the rebellion already. Like, they're really just putting all those pieces on the chessboard. So I thought that was a great addition to the book. Maybe you don't need it in the film, but when I watch the film, I always think, oh yeah, and that's where that's going next. So that's kind of fun.
Yeah, I think that's a fun piece. I think for me, fan service is best when it adds depth to either the world building or to the character. So like I brought up how L3 is part of the Falcon. I think that adds a cool piece of world building for why the Falcon's so special. So like I enjoy that. Not to talk about it too much, but when we get R2-D2 and Luke in The Last Jedi, and R2-D2 shows the hologram of Leia, and Luke goes, "That's a cheap shot." To me, that's a good callback because it's specifically using nostalgia against the character,
right?
Not just for the audience. But R2 is saying, "Hey, remember the person you used to be?" And so that's like an in-character moment. And so fan service can be done really well. And I think that Solo is kind of 50-50. I think there's moments of rich world building and character adding depth, but there's also moments like you said, when he got his gun. Okay, I didn't really need to know that.
Right.
Like, sure, but it doesn't ruin the movie for me in any way.
Yeah. Yeah, so my final thought is just that it felt like an 80s movie to me.
Yeah.
And I know that, Ron Howard did Willow, and that's an 80s movie, and it just reminded me of that feeling. Like, it's like all the practical effects, yes, but just the tone. Like, tonally, it felt like you said, an adventure movie, an Indiana Jones movie, and Like, I'm a kid of the 80s, so that's just, that hits all the sweet spots for me. So I enjoyed the film tremendously, and I really enjoyed it this time looking critically at, all these pieces we just talked about. So as we close, we just want to say thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on X and Facebook, email us at readingbetweenreels@gmail.com, or use the SpeakPipe app on our website. If you enjoyed the show, please tell a friend and support us by writing a review on iTunes or Spotify. Our regular episodes drop every other Wednesday, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the fun.